in this video how to use Pygame to make an object-oriented game. I'm gonna try recreating an old game from when I was a kid. I think I was probably around 6. My dad had an old Mac SE, I think it was, one of those all-in-ones, and my favorite game on that computer was Airborne. And in Airborne, you were this little guy in the bottom left-hand corner, and you had 2 weapons. You had a cannon that you could stand at and shoot, and then you could push the space bar, and you'd switch over to this mortar that would lob these shots down on the ground. And as you started, then these helicopters would fly in into the screen, and then you could use the mouse to point basically where the helicopters were, and then you'd click to shoot, and the bullets would go, and then those helicopters would send these parachuters out of them, and they would slowly float down. And if enough of them gathered on the ground, you allowed enough of them to go on the ground, they would come over and throw a grenade at you, blow you up, and that would be game over. So as I go through, I'm gonna walk you through the basics of how you start laying out and structuring your code for using the Pygame library, as well as using sprite objects and sprite groups. Now, those are really useful for the Pygame library, and even though it's possible to make games without using the built-in sprite object, I really recommend you do it and you learn how to use it, because there's some built-in collision methods that they've put into the Pygame library that makes use of sprites and sprite groups that make it a lot easier. A lot of steps, a lot easier than if you were to do it all manually. All right, so let's get started. This is going to be a big project, so this is going to be split up into multiple videos. I don't know how many videos we'll get to right now, but we'll just go step by step. Here we go. So at the very beginning, you want to make sure that you have Pygame installed, and if you don't, I'll have instructions linked to the description of this video below. Okay, so assuming you have Pygame installed, then you import Pygame, and you can verify that Pygame is installed by just saving your script and running it, just like that. If it runs and doesn't give you an error, then you know that Pygame is installed properly. Okay. Now I should also mention that when you are I'm using VS Code right now, and what you should always do, notice I actually haven't done this right, you should always choose to open a folder and have the folder of your project open. All right. It doesn't actually work as well if you have a parent folder open, and the reason why is you're going to get into errors later on when you refer to images that are either in subdirectories or something like that. It's not going to be able to find the images. So we want to open folder, and you can see here I've already got an Airborne folder created, and I've created an images directory as well. So I'm going to choose that folder, and then it should, let's try that again. There we go. It should then show me all of the other files in there. I've got a problem. There we go. That's more like it. So now if I click here, I can see all of the files that I've got. Here we go. So I've imported Pygame, and I've got my images directory. I've already created a bunch of images for my game. If you're wondering how I made them using Piskel. It's another website for creating pixelated graphics. And my helicopter, I even made a bit of an animated version. I've got 3 different versions of the helicopter there. And as we go, I'm going to show you guys how I made it animated. later on. Okay. Now I know with most games you're going to want to import random because usually there's some element of randomness in there. Now the first thing we got to do is we need to initialize Pygame, and then we also want to set up the dimensions of our window. Okay. I recommend that as you go, you comment as you know, and so you don't have to comment everything after the fact. So for width, I'm going to make it 1200 wide, and then height, I'm going to make it maybe 800 high. We can try that. Okay. And then I'm going to make a variable screen equal to pygame.display.setMode. And in here, it's going to need a tuple, I believe, of our width and our height. Okay. Once we've got that, that's what actually initializes our screen at a certain width and height. And now we want to have, I'm going to make our main while loop, and for this I'm just going to have an infinite loop going on, because it's just going to constantly go check and then check for changes of state in our game, and we're going to program in a way for the game to stop and to quit itself. Okay. Now the first thing that we want to have, and you have to think about this in terms of every frame, with anything visual like this, and with Pygame, we want to tell the program to draw from the first, what's the first thing we want to have it draw, and then add our additional sprites afterwards. And if you've seen any of my other tutorial videos, intro to Pygame, then I walk through a lot of that as well. So what I also need here is to set up my colors. So I'm going to set up some basic colors for my game. We can always add more later. And this is a tuple, and white, it's a tuple of RGB values. Black is 000. Red is 25500. To be honest, I'm not sure I'm going to even need red, because this is mostly going to be black and white. By the way, if you're curious to actually see what the original Airborne looked like, I'll include a link in the description as well for you to see a video of what that looks like. So I'm going to start with filling my screen with white, and then I'm going to go pygame.display.update. And what that does is that takes all of the things, all the commands I've told it to draw and to fill, and it actually updates the window, the screen, with those. And let's see now if I've done that correctly, or if I've already got some errors. Oh, there we go. So I've got a window. There's nothing else happening. I'm going to stop it there, but it looks like I've got my window correct. I've got 1200 by 800, and now I am ready to start. And Pygame uses the term surface a lot, so the display is considered one surface, and what we're doing is drawing on the surface. When you think of the while loop, incrementally, think of it like we're laying transparencies one at a time. Whatever we lay down first, that becomes drawn kind of as a background, and anything we lay down afterwards or draw after will appear above the previous ones. That's why you want to start with drawing our background. Now, I want to start by having the helicopter fly across the screen. Let's see if we can do that. Now, you're going to find that as soon as you start animating stuff, it'll probably go really fast, especially if you're doing this on a Windows machine. If you're on a Mac, it tends to by default run slower, like maybe 30 frames or even slower than that. Either case, I recommend we set up a clock. there is a built-in clock, and we can set and limit the frame rate. If you're doing this on a Windows machine, it goes like crazy unless you set a clock and limit that frame rate. So here, I'm going to go pygame.time.clock, and that is a built-in method to the object time. And then inside our while loop, we just need a clock.tick, and then we can set our frame rate. So I'm going to keep it fairly low at 30. Of course, you can increase that to whatever you like. But just be aware that as you increase and play with that later on, if you set the speed and are programming the speed of certain objects' movement based on a tick of 30, and then suddenly you change it to a 60, you're going to find everything move a lot faster. And so you might have to go back in your code and change the speed and movement of everything else to move accordingly. But for now, I'm going to leave this as 30. Now, for the helicopter, I'm going to set up a class for this. Okay. So this is going to be the helicopter class. Okay. So I'm going to call it helicopter. And inside this, I'm going to make this a child class of the built-in Pygame Sprite class. And the reason I'm doing that is so that it can inherit all of the properties that are built in to the Pygame Sprite. Okay, and you'll see later on why that gets to be really useful. Okay, so here we go. So now I need to always start with a constructor and pass in self, and I'm also going to have it pass in an X and a Y value. I'm going to decide outside the helicopter class where it should go, and then it will specify there. So right away we should be able to set our X and our Y. We can actually do that in a single line. There we go. And then we also want to call the constructor of our parent class. So I'm going to go super.init. And that calls the constructor of its parent, super. Okay. So there we go. We have a helicopter. We haven't drawn anything yet. So I'm going to define a draw method for our helicopter class. That way we can actually see what it is. I would also realize that I want to have an image for this helicopter. And so for this, I'm going to go pygame.image.load, which is a method of image. And this is where you need to specify the path relative to this script of the image we want. And so I'm going to go back here. So we want in here, it has to be in quotes as a string, images slash, and then heli0.png. Okay. You'll notice that here I've got 3 helicopters, and because I'm going to be flipping the image of it to be able to get an animation. So I'm going to show you how you can get some animation in your images fairly simply. Okay. For that, I'm also going to make another variable called ImageNum, and I'm going to make it equal to 0, because notice with each of them, I incremented the number right there, but otherwise it's exactly the same. So just to keep it simple here, I'm going to actually use self.imageNum, this format, to specify where it is, or which number it's on. Okay. All right. So now, when we're ready to draw, we want to screen.blit self.image And where do we want to blit it? We want to blit it at self.x, self.y. Okay. Now I might have a bit of an error there. I actually redid this in another file before. So I'm just going to verify. There we go. Yeah. Looks good. And finally, let's just outside here, just to see if we can actually see our helicopter or not. Let's make h equal to helicopter, and let's just put them, for now, I'm going to put them right in the window, 150, 150. And inside here, let's just call the draw method. Okay? And let's see what happens. And there we go. We've got our helicopter. Beautiful. All right. Now that's not really exciting. We want him moving. So rather than having him at 150, 150, let's have him start off the screen to the right. We're going to have him going at, starting at width plus, let's say 50. And I'm going to add a fly method. And what this is going to do is I'm going to call this fly method inside of here, and I'm going to have it so that as he moves, or every time the fly method is called, we're going to have him move. And so I'm going to also here, I'm going to give him a speed variable, let's say 10 to start. And I'm going to, I want him to go from the right to the left, so I'm going to decrease my x by self.speed. And don't forget self in front, because we need to be changing our self variables. After that, just so that we can have our animation going, what I'm also going to do is I'm going to increase our image number by 1. Now you can imagine that that works well for 2 frames, because I do have 3 images here, but once that image num becomes 3, that's going to be a problem. So what I'm going to do is actually make it equal to self.imageNum plus 1. I'm going to increase that, and then I'm going to make it equal to that modulo 3. Okay? Which means that once image num becomes 3, then it's going to translate into a 0. And then it will go, but then it will become 1, 2, and then flip back to 0, and just keep on going like that. All right? Finally, after that, we need to change, because here we're blitting self.image. So let's just reset our self.image variable to be equal to that new image. All right. Another thing that we should have done is set our rectangle, and the rectangle is important for collision later on. So self.image.getRect, and we're going to do the same thing. And inside there, I'm going to update that at self.x, self.y. and make the top left equal to that. What that does is it makes sure, because if I didn't include that, it'll actually continue to create the rectangle at its original location, but because I'm changing my x, not really my y, then this sets its rectangle, its collision rectangle, back to that new location. All I need to do now, well, I've already called my fly method, so let's just see if that works. And there we go. We've got our helicopter flying across. Once, of course, he goes through, we're not going to be able to see it again unless we tell it to do something. So in our fly method, what we can also do is tell it to flip back around. But actually, I'm going to be doing this in my while loop because we don't want just a single helicopter. That would be silly. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a helicopter group. Okay, and so instead of just helicopter, I'm going to make helicopters equal to pygame.sprite.group. All right. And I'm going to make a variable for start x positions equal to a list, either -50 or width plus 50. Why am I doing that? Because every time I add a new helicopter, I want it to either come in from the right or the left. Okay? And one last thing is I want to also make a variable to track what frame we're on. Because what I'd like to do for my game is not just have a single helicopter on the screen at once or a couple, but I want to have it so that every couple seconds or so another helicopter spawns and comes across. So let's that means that I'm going to check if frame modulo, let's say 75, just over 2 seconds, is equal to 0, then helicopters dot add helicopter. And now we can add a helicopter into this sprite group, just like that. It's kind of like a list appending to it, but it has the benefit of having access to all of the sprite collision methods that sprite groups have associated with them. Now the start x, I'm going to make a start x variable, and I'm going to make it equal to random.choice of start x positions. That way it's going to be either on the left or on the right. Start y, I'm going to make that equal to random.randint, either between, let's say, 20 and maybe 350, something like that. So that way we can pass those variables in start x, start y, into our new helicopter class, make an instance of that, add it to the group, and then rather than calling draw and fly on h, what we can do is go for h in helicopters, h.draw, h.fly. And then finally, I'm going to do another one for h in helicopters if h.x is greater than width, let's say plus 40, or h.x is less than -40, then let's actually we can, what a sprite has is actually a built-in method called kill. And essentially what it means is it removes it from whatever group it's in. And that way it'll remove it, it'll delete that that object, that sprite from our sprite group, and then it will no longer be drawn or it will no longer be flying. You might be wondering, why did I iterate through them again? And I'm going to show you why. I tried this earlier and I found that when I had it within the same for loop, the other helicopters would kind of flash because I'm essentially removing something from a list while it's in the middle of iterating through that list. Wowzers. And there we go. We've got some funny things going on with these ones over here, and that's because we're increasing it a lot and adding a whole bunch of new helicopters. Maybe let's try increasing that, but also notice that fly is it's always going from the right to the left. And that's kind of a problem, actually. So I'm going to have it start off the screen. And we also want to have it so that they go in a certain direction depending on whether it's on the right or the left. So right here, I'm going to check if x is less than 0, then I'm going to make direction equal to +1, else make direction equal to -1. And that way when we fly, I'm not going to go minus equals, I'm going to go plus equals speed times self dot direction. And that way we can actually flip the direction, and it will it's going to either decrease x if direction is negative, or it'll increase x if direction is positive. And it will be set based on where it is. Let's see what that does now. Oh, it has no attribute direction. Did I not? Oh, and I didn't do the self. You probably even saw it while I typed it. All right, we still have way too many helicopters going on. You know what I'm going to do? Just because I feel like there's something not quite right. Now what is frame? Frame is still 0. Ha! You know what my problem was? You probably saw it a long time ago. I haven't been increasing frame. That's really funny. Let's do that now. So frame is increased by 1, which means now we should be good. And now we've got our helicopters. Let's try that again. Now we've got, it's a lot more reasonable. There's one. There's another one. We're not seeing any coming from the left still. So there's still something wacky going on here. Well, I'm going to keep taking a look at that. For now, we've got some helicopters going on, and we've got some movement. And in the next video, I'm going to show you how to add a shooter in the bottom left-hand corner, so we can start aiming and shooting. As well as that, we're going to be using the mouse to track where you're going to point and start shooting at those helicopters. All right? Thanks for joining me.